how are you producing your content and where are you meeting them? Meet people where they are. Meet them in a place.
This is a tragedy of the commons, right? We're also desperate for the full picture of data on someone that we actually end up sacrificing the user experience for it in some cases.
Data is always directional. It gives you the guidance to go in a certain path, and then you continue to test and learn and experiment to make sure whether that's working or not.
This is the Scale Your Business with Data podcast with Graeme Crawford of Crawford Macmillan. You're now listening to the only podcast that is designed from the ground up to bring you insights and stories from real data experts. You'll learn how to use the power of data to take your business to the next level with Graeme and his guests. They're also going to show you how the data is often the gold hidden in plain sight and how it will unblock the road to growth ahead. With the clarity of vision and inspiring leadership of change, your business should be able to make multi-million-dollar decisions in minutes, not months. So let's get started. Thanks for listening.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Scale Your Business with Data. And today I'm joined by an old friend and colleague of mine, Sukhi Sahni, who is a seasoned Marcom leader and expert with 20 years of experience in shaping narratives and leading transformation for big brands. She has revolutionized how corporate America thinks about data-driven storytelling. From her journey as an immigrant who pivoted her dreams of broadcast journalism to becoming one of the top innovators in communications, Sukhi has spent her career proving that when you combine authentic human connection with strategic data insights, you don't just communicate better, you drive real, tangible business outcomes. Sukhi is glittering with honors. She has been recognized as a global innovator. She teaches at Georgetown and overall offers a fascinating perspective on how data doesn't replace the human element in communication, but amplifies it. And what I love about Sukhi's approach, as well as the wonderful person that she is how she has managed to scale intimate personal storytelling across massive corporate structures. And today we're going to dive into exactly how she does that. So welcome to you, Sukhi.
Well, thank you, Graeme. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invite and for the opportunity.
No, it's great to see you again. And when did we last speak? Maybe a year or so ago? In the world
Probably
of
a year,
data,
yeah.
storytelling, AI has changed massively since then. So we've got a lot to catch up on,
Sure.
and a lot to talk about. So I want to start with like one of the most common metrics ever arises when we talk about data in the context of communication and brand and marketing, and that is views. So how often a piece of content is viewed, how often a web page is viewed. And I think my own opinion is that 5 years ago, views was a questionable metric to use. And I think we're talking about the battle for attention or engagement. I think now views has become almost an obsolete metric as the algorithms have got better, as the people are getting information from AI search engines and all sorts of other stuff. So with one of our most reliable metrics disappearing in views, like how should we think about replacing that? And what are we really competing for on the modern internet?
I would say I think nothing gets obsolete in my mind, right? I think it's how do you continue to enhance and evaluate what's really working. So I agree with you, right? Back in the day, when we were launching new social platforms, it was all about how many people are on the platform, right? How many followers do you have? Very quickly, we realized just having a couple of million followers doesn't really make sense. And then we were like, okay, what are the new metrics, that we need to focus on too? So I think it's part of the evolution as we think about the changing habits of how people like you and I and average consumers are changing how they consume any kind of content on these platforms. So I think from my perspective, what I've seen and what I've heard a lot of our students, and we talk about in the school as well, is a lot of focus on engagement. And I think engagement is driven in different ways. An example I will share with you is when I talked to my 16-year-old and she's like, I do not make any buying decision unless I go into the comments of the Instagram post, right? Now, we as professionals in communications and brand building look at commentary to really drive sort of as, what are people talking about it, but it's not really the measure of success unless you've got like, a lot of negative commentary down there. So I think, again, I feel like in some spots, I think you need to have the views because it also depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to an organization and a leadership that is pretty nascent in terms of these metrics, then spend less time around getting them up to speed and trying to understand what's relevant, what's not. Come on, I come from a world, Graeme, where impressions are still something that we believe in, we still report on, because we haven't been able to move the leadership from that space as well, right? So I think that's the whole thing. I think viewership is probably the views is critical. But it really depends on the audience. But where I would really like to focus in, like, how can you showcase engagement overall of the content that you produce, whether it's your own content on your site, whether you're producing something as part of thought leadership, or you're practically just putting a lot of content on your branded social channels.
I want to pull more on the example you mentioned from your daughter and this generation that's coming through that seeks authentic first party experience of things before they make decisions. And this is in a world of multi-touch attribution now, which didn't exist when you or I started our careers. The simple old days, right, Suki, when you got someone's attention on the internet, and then they clicked buy, right? And
Yeah.
like, all right, well, there's a return on ad spend metric is flying. But now I think increasingly consumers don't buy until they've had multiple touch points with a brand, 5 or 6. And often the expectation is that a number of those touch points, like your daughter, like our first party experience, first party objective experience. And you see this reflected in the recent algorithm changes that Google has made, right? More and more you see Reddit answers coming up near the top of search results, Quora answers coming up near the top of search results, Wikipedia pages coming up near the top of search results. All things that, as someone at the helm of a big corporate brand, you have no control over. So how do you balance like all those things out of your control with the things that remain in your control on your domain?
Yeah, I think you always like, right? That's a general leadership guidance that I always have is like focus on what you can control. And I think the same goes for really brands. And what you as a brand and as a storyteller can do is really own the storytelling and be as authentic as possible. But be mindful of, again, don't take one piece of content and then put the same content in 5 different channels. What's going to work on LinkedIn is probably not going to work on Instagram, right? What might work on your branded journalism page is probably not going to work when you pitch something to, let's say, a news outlet or a broadcast outlet. So I think really understanding sort of the content and controlling that. And what are the stories? I mean, even, Graham, if you look at how we're using AI today, even as simple as ChatGPT, there's a lot of the authentic voices is what it's pulling up on. It's pulling up on leader quotes. It's pulling up from resources that are tied back to someone's website in the terms of a press release. I mean, I've always said that the press release is long dead, but I think there's a resurgence of where are you pulling your information from,
Yeah.
and are they coming from credible sources? So I feel like that's the other pieces. And I think you said something really interesting earlier about the multi-touch point. Yes, and I think 5 or 6 touch points before you can even start considering whether you want a relationship with the brand. Like that's how broad it is, and that's what I mean by the fragmentation of the media. And many people don't realize how much time are we spending before we take our finger and swipe it off. 3 seconds.
Yeah,
Three
maximum.
seconds. So,
Yeah.
right? So, as a brand, you only have 3 seconds to engage them. So, think about it. If you're putting a lot of content with 6 sentences right underneath your post, you've just lost them already. So, I think it's really keeping in mind the behaviors of how people are consuming. And when I say people, it could be whoever your core audience is, right? I'm really looking into consumers, being very thoughtful about what are their consumption habits, how are you producing your content, and where are you meeting them? Meet people where they are. Meet them in a place. Here's another example. When I like to go to Instagram and I really like an ad because I love that dress, I click on it, it
Yeah.
takes me to that site, but if it tells me, oh my God, now you have to sign up, you've lost me right there. I don't want 3 touch points. I want to go straight to the dress. And if I like it enough, I might be really close to making that purchase. But if you added 3 additional touch points, you probably lost me in that process too. So it's fascinating. I mean, all the things, if you remember when we were working together, we used to talk about customer journey. I think
Yeah.
customer journeys are more important today than ever before. And anybody who's in the marketing, communications, brand side that's not really thinking about that and developing your strategies in isolation are almost missing the point.
There's a couple of paradoxes that you brought up there, and I'd love to get to both of them. The first, like to go to the most recent example that you mentioned, the buying of the dress on Instagram. So this is where data meets customer journey in a very interesting way, because this is what the real battle on the internet is for the first party experience data, right?
Mhm.
And the other thing, which I know to be true when I'm shopping for dresses on Instagram, Suki, is that when you click, if that dress is not available for purchase through Instagram Shop or through Instagram's e-commerce
Hmm.
capabilities, before you get the dress, you get a big sign saying, "You're about to leave our website. Are you sure you want to do this? Please don't do this." And basically, as you and I both know, the underlying premise for that is once you navigate away from our website, I can no longer track what you're doing. And I don't like that. I can't track you through to purchase, whatever. And it punishes e-commerce brands for trying to sell off of Instagram and rewards those who choose to sell through Instagram and give Meta a cut, right? So there's a really interesting paradox there that this is a tragedy of the commons, right? We're also desperate for the full picture of data on someone that we actually end up
Hmm.
sacrificing the user experience for it in some cases, or
Yeah.
we collectively sacrifice that user experience.
Yeah. And I think again, as marketeers, right, that's where we have to, and I think you asked earlier, it's like, what do you want to control versus what you don't want to control? And I think most brands that have done really well is when they have the ease of use. Because again, one of the largest retailers online is Amazon, and Amazon is not really known for their products. It's really known for the ease of use, right? Like for example, Disney sells you happiness. They're not selling you tickets to a park. So I think it's really focusing on what's your value prop and where does data really play a role. I've always believed, and I still maintain, data is always directional. It gives you the guidance to go in a certain path, and then you continue to test and learn and experiment to make sure whether that's working or not. Numbers are great, but numbers on its own don't tell the entire story as well. So I think that's the way I think about it is, what are you going to sacrifice? Are you going to sacrifice the UX and really the fulfillment that your core customer might get out of the experience? Or you really want to make sure that you're tracking every piece of their movement so you can think about cross-selling and some of these other aspects too, which can get into a lot of, difficult territory. And there have been a lot of companies that have, either benefited from them or actually have used it in wrong ways as well too. So I think I'm just fascinated because, like I said, data is driving. Like some days, don't you feel like you whispered the word hamburger, and suddenly you start seeing ads of hamburgers, and then you're like, okay, did they get my IP address, or were
Yeah.
they listening to me silently? Like, how did you know I'm in the mood of a hamburger? And you start serving me all these ads around that as well too. So I think I'm at a point where I'm very comfortable knowing that a lot of our information is out there. And we have willingly given that for the ease of use that I want as a customer. But I also have a lot of friends who are like, we're not going to give you that information. And I'm still going to go to my desktop, still try to go online, or still maybe try to go back into an actual physical store to shop because that's, what makes me more comfortable.
This concept that you're speaking about, I think 10 years ago, I don't know if this still exists, this concept, but the concept of the creepy line, right? So how much information can a company or a website or a brand know about me before I become creeped out by it? And that used to be pretty much anything would be across the creepy line. But then expectations have shifted. And again, the new generation of consumers like your daughter, like
Mm-hmm.
have very firm expectations of why don't you understand why don't you know my preferences? I put all this out there
Yep.
and I click the terms and conditions boxes. And then for the hamburger example, wow, like it's could it be confirmation bias? I mean, you hear the story of the yellow cars, right? You don't see any yellow cars until you think about yellow cars, and then you see them everywhere. So maybe that's happening with hamburgers, or maybe like in the depths of all the terms and conditions that we all scroll past every single day. Like who even reads those? Um, have we said to Amazon Alexa or Google Pixel or Siri or whatever it might be, like it's okay for you to listen to me if it's in my interests? And maybe it is in your interests that you want a hamburger. Like there's a whole moral ethical angle on that. Maybe it is or isn't in your interest to eat a hamburger. I don't know.
Yeah.
Depends on the situation.
I agree. I mean, it's some days it's really scary, but then I personally feel we are way past where we have to get. Remember, like the whole concept of the Big Brother, like
Yeah.
someone's watching over you. I think there's a level of comfort with that, and I think now the level of comfort has even gone past with more and more people either individually using AI tools or as we start embedding artificial intelligence into how we do our day jobs as well, right? So some days you get past, but I don't think people are shocked anymore. Like we're way past that shocked
Yeah.
behavior that used to come initially.
And especially if you're an existing customer and in service of someone, that there's an example that I worked on just before we worked together, where, I was able to help solve the problem of, if I'm on this brand's website or app, and then I have some sort of problem or I don't understand what I'm supposed to be doing, and I then call the call center, you better damn well know what I've just been doing on that mobile app, right? And the
Yeah,
customers expect that now, right?
right.
It's frustrating to people to have to go through all of that again. The other paradox I wanted to loop back to was about brand in particular, and this is a gray area, no right answer to this question. I think it varies. So we spoke about all the first party content that people want, the comments, the Reddits, the Quoras, the Google reviews, whatever it might be. Now, you could argue that's out of company's control, but you could also argue that's within a company's control, because if you provide world-class products and services, then you're going to get great reviews and people are going to say good things about you. If you scam people and don't give them good value for money, they're going to write bad things about you. So to some extent, that is in your control.
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side of it, though, thinking about particularly how the AI models and Google now have begun to source information from those third parties, people can over-index on the fear a little bit. Like, one dissatisfied customer posting something on Reddit is not going to outweigh the domain authority of you posting something on your website.
Mm-hmm.
And I think usually, like, the AI models will look to sources that they know to be of good authority. But here's the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing that we also both know. In terms of their individual domains, not all brands are reliable as others at actually truly representing what they're about, what they do on their own domain. So I wonder how kind of AI is going to fish through. I mean, Google has this concept of domain authority, right? In SEO, of like, how reliable is this domain, and it's built on like, how fast is the website, how many people go there, how many people link to it, and there's no estimator of truth. I wonder if AI models have already, or indeed might in the future, sort of build some aspect of domain trust into
Mm-hmm.
whether or not they push a brand's owned content as part of search results.
I wouldn't be surprised if that becomes an ultimate revenue models for some of these organizations, right? As in more we start using these AI authorities. We've already talked about SEO, and we all know that there's been a decline in terms of search engine optimization, like the keywords. And again, if you're searching for anything right now, let's say you're searching for a specific brand or a specific product, and I think most people, instead of even going to Google, are actually going into these AI tools to understand. And it's human nature, right? Like, the one thing I tell my students is always fact check. And that's not something that just started because we are using AI tools. That is something that fundamentally every person should always be doing, is like fact checking your resources. You and I both learned that at school
Yeah.
20 years ago, right? So I think it's the same fundamental thought processes here, is check that. But again, I think as and when more mainstream people start using these tools, I can see a reason where somebody's trying to monetize that and say, well, now we're going to start monetizing owned content that has more authority, and we're going to make sure that's showing up through these AI models. And that allows brands to work with them a little bit more closely as well too. So again, I just feel like, again, I'm not an expert. I think I'm learning by experimenting, by using, by seeing what's happening around me. But it's scary on certain days, but I think it also then brings home the fact is that we are all in the business of creating trust. And I think that's what it fundamentally comes down to. How do you create the trust? Who's got the relevance? Who owns the trust currency? And you have to look at all these spectrums, right? Like, you have to look at what you're posting on your own channels. What are you posting in third parties? Like, let's say, what is the media talking about, and then how they're talking about you? How are you showing up in generative AI search?
Yeah.
I think Reddit is very critical for B2C companies. That's where, if you're not engaging as a brand in forums like Quora and Reddit, there's a huge conversation that you're leaving out the door, because those are early predictors. They're early indicators of, are there certain elements of your products that are not working? Apple does it really well. They are as much inclined into creating new products as much as they're trying to evaluate how their current products work. And that's why they've invested so much into making sure that the relevant information is available, and they're silently engaging on those forums as well too. So again, I feel like it is so core to know what's working, what's not. Remember, like, the thing we used to always talk about measurement is it's more about calibrating versus celebrating.
Right.
Measurement should always be about, not about so much about, oh, look, my campaign was successful. It was always about this is what it taught me and this is how I can get better. And where you and I come from, with very deeply rooted into research and data as a foundation of how we did our day jobs, I think that's just a critical place to be in. So
Especially in this world now, and this is an example of a great use case of AI, right? So if you want some ad creative, right, you have your best minds come up with the best copy, but like, what is the best picture, or what is the best call to action? Or as we talked about, with the 3 seconds you have to get someone's attention, what is the best hook, right? How do I even get people to read my marketing copy
yeah.
in the first place? And it used to be maybe you could test 1 or 2, you do an A/B test. That's why they're called A/B tests, because we could do 2. But now you could use AI to be a great assistant to that process, and you could spin up 100 different pieces of ad marketing copy or 100 different pictures, and you could test all of them. And it gets to the fact that the very fact that you were talking about, right? The goal is not how can I one shot a winning advert. The goal is how can I collect data in a deep and statistically significant enough way that I can work my way to the winning advert, because
Yep.
there's a lot more art than science in marketing than I think people realize.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that PR is both an art and a science, right? I think we've got the art part, but the science part is where the experimentation comes in. And I think that's the part that's not in our control because everything around us is changing. So if you're going to sit back and just like stay in your lanes and not really touch what's happening around you, I think you're going to be fairly obsolete at some point, or you will have data that's not really informing anything as well. And I really like what you just touched upon in general is, again, directional data that informs what you want to do, and then the ongoing testing. And I think there's a lot of conversation right now about AI, right? Is it going to impact our jobs? Is it, going to, impact young students who are going to be graduating in a couple of years?
Yeah.
I think what it's going to help us is scale. You just talked about that. It's going to be more efficient in terms of we're going to spend less time on things like research. I mean, I remember days when if you're trying to do a competitive analysis, there is so much data out there. It allows you to do that same amount of work in a much lesser time. You still have to go back and add your own perspective and what is the point of view, right? It might give you that directional guidance, but then you have to sit down and analyze that yourself. So I think where it's speed to market is going to be great because you'll be able to do a lot of things faster. You could scale testing in new and different ways, so you have more data that you can look into. But I personally feel, Graham, especially in the world that I live in, where it's communications,
Yeah.
reputation, building trust, that the human interaction is going to be almost as critical, but it can be either or. It almost has to be together. And the ones who find this beautiful relationship and how to coexist with each other are going to be the most successful versus the ones who continue to stay in their individual lanes.
We talked about this, right? The CEO of Anthropic come out and predict the decline of white collar jobs, and particularly entry level white collar jobs. And I think that's maybe a little narrow viewpoint, because if you talk about white collar jobs, entry level white collar jobs as they exist today, then maybe that's the case. But humans adapt and people can adapt. So if you were just like 5 years ago, Suki, if you were 21 again,
Always 21, yeah.
and entering, looking to enter this job market, coming out of college, maybe it's your last year in college, like speaking to somebody like that in the audience, like how would you advise them to skill themselves up or approach the job market that they're coming into?
I was sharing this when I started teaching about 6 years back, and I told my students, I said, you have to have a minor in data, some sort of minor where allows you to really interpret data. I think what you need to do is have fungible skills. You can't just have a project management degree and just become a PM. There's some core fundamentals that you require. You need to know how to do budgeting. You
Right.
need to know how to build Excel sheets. Remember the days when I remember we were like, oh, we don't do Excel because we are writers. We are the ones who own the written word.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work that way as you continue to lead large teams. You need to know how to build an operating model. And that is going to require you to think about risk and compliance and frameworks. You have to understand technology. That's not just the job of people sitting in the technology team. You have to know what platforms work for you. How are you going to implement social media if you don't have any familiarity with what's happening with the algorithms, right? So I think AI, I put it in the same space, is how do we think about that completely and
Right.
making sure that, that's the approach that you're taking overall is across the board. So my advice to my current students is become a good use case and use AI. And there's a lot of debate in academia where some professors are completely against it, some are much more open to it. I think where I draw the line is use it for research, but you have to make sure that you're referencing that and be open about it and say, this is where I used it, this is where it allowed me to help. But this is really where my own perspectives are coming in as well too. So I think you have to just be open, just be thoughtful. My own daughter graduates in 2 years from high school. And I told her, if you're not building something with these tools today, you're going to be way behind the curve when you do graduate and even try to go into college, because your lectures are going to change. What they're going to teach is going to change. How they're going to teach you is going to change. And guess what, Graham? How they're going to learn is going to change too. So
And I'd say on top of that, how they're going to examine you and assess you is going to change also, right? It's a friend of mine is a professor at a local at GMU, and he was pilot testing with me some AI stuff. He was sending me assignments and asking me to complete them with AI alongside his students, and he had come up with smart enough ways to detect that I didn't really know about the origins of Buddhism or whatever it was, whatever it was that the essay was about. But I think learning how to integrate it is critical. Like as a writer, as someone who studied journalism and has no doubt written many, many pages of wonderful words. And then likely as someone who, like many of us, has seen raw writing that's created by an AI, it's very obvious, right? And you see it, like, just go on LinkedIn, look at the comments, right? Oh, what a wonderful perception on it. Like it's very obvious. And actually, like, side note on LinkedIn, it's I've made this comment a couple of times. Typos are now a differentiator. The typos and grammar, my bad grammar
the
and
M
poor sentence
dash.
structure
Yeah.
is now
Yeah.
a bit of a differentiator, because people can tell that I'm actually writing to them. So I wouldn't be surprised if there's people out there deliberately putting typos in LinkedIn posts these days. But like, where's the scale? Like, there's a middle ground somewhere, right?
I agree, and I think, Graham, I mean, this is fundamental to who I am. But I've always said you never need to be the person in the room who has all the answers. So I think there's a beauty in actually making mistakes. It's okay to have a typo because that's what makes you human. If everything was perfect, if every word was well chosen, you can, like one of the prompts that I do when I do research, if I'm trying to pull a first draft together, is I always say use conversational speech. And you should look at, do a test. And I would advise everybody do it. Put a prompt on any topic and then tell them and say use conversational speech. You will see clearly the difference. So I think part of it, this is going to be, is like, it's the prompt engineering. Like, how are you teaching the algorithm to actually work in your favor? I think that's going to be the critical thing. An example that comes to mind, and this is not my own, I heard this, but somebody compared the use of AI right now to when calculators came in.
Right.
And every parent was like, oh my God, my kids are never going to learn math, because now they have calculators. Did that change? No.
No.
There's a place and there's a time for a calculator, and it's very cultural. Back in India, when I grew up, we could not have calculators. Here, when my daughter went to 8th grade, we bought her a calculator because it's additive. It is speed to market. It allows them to do large fractions. And I'm like, where's your pencil? Where's your paper? Like, you need that. She's like, I don't need it because I need to get to the answer really quickly. As long as I know the steps, it's just
structure and the
helping me
steps.
too, right? So I think it stuck with me because I think it's such a great example of accept what's in front of you, find a way to integrate it, but think of it as making you better. Of course, with any new changes, we have to look into, as I mentioned, the ethics around AI, the fact checking around data. But data has always been about its source. If you remember, we always have to look at the data sources. The data source is almost as important as the data itself. And again, it's not changing the fundamentals. It's really taking what we know. And I think it's just like using new tools that helps us get better. And I feel like this is just the beginning. I mean, there's so much in front of us. Let's have this conversation 5 years from now and see where we are. And I can bet you we'll be living in a different universe.
Oh, I'll book it in the calendar now. I'll send the invitation. But I think I have a good example of what I think a good use would be, and just from this conversation just now, for example. So, in fact, let's do that. Let's actually do this, Sukhi. I'll send you the copy. So here we are. We're having a conversation. It's super easy to get a transcript of this conversation. AI makes it super easy. We can transcribe the conversation. So we could feed this into a model and say, hey, Suki spoke for 2 minutes about how college students should prepare for the workforce in light of AI. And it would take almost exclusively your words and your phrasing and your conversational style and structure it into something that would work online. Now, previously, go back 5 years, we could have had this conversation and you could have thought, oh, I should write a LinkedIn post about that maybe, or something like that. And it might have taken you 30 minutes to go over it and structure it and reformat it again. Right now, you have a speed to market tool, like you talked about, that doesn't sacrifice your authenticity. It's not built on any assumption of knowledge. It's not relying on any AI model to know about the things that you, as someone who teaches at Georgetown, has first party experience of. But yet, it gives you that speed to market without sacrificing any of that authenticity.
Yeah, I mean, talking about teaching Grammarly, remember, like the first use case of Grammarly was to really make sure that your grammar is correct. And now they've incorporated AI into that too. So I think when we sit with our children, I'm like, okay, my daughter, again, I think this is the professor in me, is like, she wrote this beautiful poem. And I'm like, okay, how much of this really comes from what you research and how much of this is you putting pen to paper? And I think instead of just like directly going to a place and say, well, you just used a tool and this is an output of that, I think it's finding a way to make these conversations more commonplace. Talking to the next generation about the use case, because they will be using. It's like telling young adults not to use their phones. We all know the good and the bad of that. It's finding that middle ground and the balance. And I think that's what the critical aspect of this is. And that's why I keep saying is, whenever there's technology, whenever there is changes, there's always two sides of it, right? There's some people who are going to be very early adopters, testing and learning, and really paving the way. There always going to be a group of naysayers who are either going to sit still and not change everything. I think you always want to be in the middle place. Take calculated risks, understand what the needs are, pick one thing, test it out, and then see how you can leverage it. Same goes for data, right? Like, again, use the data. The data only works really well when it actually gets you from point A to point B. And it has less got to do with, well, I'm going to use data to prove X versus Y. I mean, it's used to build business models. That's why you experiment. That's why you test. That's why you do A/B testing. Again, I think I'm most excited about the speed to market. And if I had 20 minutes in a day and I could use only 5 for certain aspects of my work and save 15 in other places that I didn't have time to, I think it's just better quality of life. And maybe that's another way to look at it.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a really nice angle on it. You spoke about heart and authenticity and intimacy there, and that's one of the questions I had for you as someone who's been responsible for the brand voice of like massive brands, real massive brands here. One of the things that the really effective brands do is speak to the heart, speak to the emotions of their customers or their potential customers, and AI, not any AI that I've seen is very good at that. But how do you take a message that feels intimate and then scale it across millions of customers? Like, how have you done that historically? And it's the methods you've used to do that changed over time?
I think it's well, the traditional way, I think a very true way from a marketing perspective would be to continue to do the message testing, right? Like putting the messaging out there, looking at who the audience is. A message that might resonate, Graham, with you in a certain format might not resonate with me at all. So I think personalization, that's why it's become so critical, especially in things like e-commerce. If you're an e-commerce company, that is your bread and butter, and that's how you have to think about it, personalizing each and every experience. If you're in personal finance, it's, I think, really understanding that customer journey and making sure you are meeting your customers where they are. Don't serve them a credit card when you know from their interactions and touch points that they're actually looking to open a bank account with you.
Yeah.
That moment will come when you can bring the others as well. And it's where you're meeting, what are you offering them? I think the thing that's going to stay really critical in terms of humanizing this is going to be the human voice. Who are the people? Or do you have people with authority who are giving you the information? Who are the voices that are making sure that they're telling that story as well? The trust is an all-time low, if you've seen. It's at the lowest with brands. It's the lowest with the government. There was a point when the
media
barometer and the media, for sure, and the fragmentation and media, if you're looking at it, is a lot of people actually have journalists who have left and created their own Substack accounts, right? Like it's changing how we even talk to media anymore as well, too. So I think when you look at all of that, it's just really critical. And I think what you then, going back to our first question, is what you then control really is your own voice and staying authentic to who you are. And then just making sure that, you continue to be consistent as well. But I would say a thing that I learned really early in my career was you're not really going to know what's working versus not if you don't experiment, and be okay if the experiments fail, because some of them are actually meant to fail. And when you do fail, it actually gets better with what's ahead of you as well too. So
We mentioned the media briefly. Print media is something that fascinates me. It's something that still continues. It's to some a relic of the past, to some of the younger folks, like our respective children, something that I don't even think they would know what it was. If I put one in front of them, you see like, compound annual growth rate of -3, -4% across that industry. Like, when do you think it's the end for print media and that ceases to become something which even exists? We've seen big layoffs at large newspapers. Like, it can only continue to decline year on year for so long, right?
Yeah. Again, I just feel like I don't think anything ends. I think everything evolves, and I think it's going to continue to evolve in terms of what are the stories the media houses are telling. Do they have to be at the scale that they are right now? And I think this is where the global perspective comes in. We obviously live here in the United States, but how are the media houses shaping up outside of the US and other global markets as well too? I think it's critical, like, as a brand communications marketeer, as a leader, you have to keep your pulse on emerging media. You have to be very thoughtful about the entire elections. And again, don't quote me on this, but from everything that I've read, podcasts played a huge role in that, right? So that's a new sense of emerging media. While we were very focused on just print, you have to think about the digital footprint. Another great, I met with this vendor a couple of weeks back, and they were like, they're finally able to showcase us exactly how many viewers have read a very specific article. So instead of saying, I got 3 billion impressions, they're not even 3 billion people where you live,
Right.
right? So it's, again, like really going deep into those data and metrics and understanding. But again, I don't think anything's ever going to die. When I was going to journalism school, everybody used to say, well, journalism is on its path, PR is the new thing. Then PR came through, and then they said experiential is a new thing. Then experiential went away, and then, influencer marketing came up. And influencer marketing is nothing but how we used to use experts way back in the day who used
Yeah.
to get on the 8 o'clock news and say, well, this is really good, and this is not that good. I mean, if you remember Susie Orman from those days, right? She was the personal finance expert, and now they're these homegrown experts. They just happen to be in different channels as well too. So I think it's going to evolve, but I think if you're somebody who's keeping a pulse point and wants to be in that middle ground, just keep your finger on the pulse on emerging media and really try to understand what's happening with them. And I think, again, the credibility of some of these resources, and where are these journalists moving? Where are they starting something on their own? I'll share with you, in Substack, there's a PR person who's right now doing interviews with the media. And she is now getting pitches from brands to talk about their products. You see how quickly that changed, because guess
Yeah.
what?
Turned on its head.
She has now authority. She's got an in wave with some of the top media journalists within technology and personal finance. So if you're not keeping a pulse on that, and she's probably going to find a way to, again, right now she's doing it because it creates this new way to get to know these people who are real humans as journalists. But I think this could be the beginning of a brand new model in a couple of years.
Yeah, my question was definitely around print journalism. I've seen, like, as a fan and user of Substack myself, like, the demand for high quality journalism is as alive as it always was. And I think if you look over there, like some of the journalists that have gone across, or models like the Atlantic as well, that have done that, or the Athletic from a sports perspective, like, not only do people want that journalism, but they're willing to pay a premium for high quality, objective journalism. And I think Piers Morgan, love him or hate him, I heard him talk about this on a podcast, that he, well, believe it or not, got tired of being told what he could or couldn't talk about or couldn't discuss. And there were always those corporate guidelines around him while he was, even working for Rupert Murdoch or whoever it was that whose organization he was under. He started his podcast of just basically Piers Morgan Unfiltered. I can't remember what the name is, and nor am I advertising or endorsing it. But he's got millions of people, millions of subscribers will turn up and listen to that. People will pay, advertisers will pay a hefty premium now to get their products featured on there. Um, and, you may or may not agree with peers, and I may or may not agree with peers either, but people will come to listen because they trust that it's objective and it's not controlled by the brand guidelines or the corporate guidelines of any higher power. It is just him speaking. I think the same is true of the journalists that are doing really well on Substack as well.
Yeah, and I think this is where also I think local journalism is going to be really critical because again, it's coming from the root of the areas that you live in. Even though the newsrooms are getting smaller, but again, there's so much credibility in how they pull their resources, they tell their stories. I keep taking my daughter's example, but she just recently did a research paper, and I think the only thing guideline I gave her, and it was about the impact on mental health when you're in a war flooded zone area and there's a lot of turmoil that's happening in the world
Mm.
around us. And I said, just be objective. As if there's one goal for you in your research paper, be objective, present both sides, and do your research, get the references, make sure the data is accurate. Again, this is what you and I learned way back in, and you don't have to go to a journalism school to understand that. And storytelling. I mean, Graham, at the end of the day, what is it that humans like to do? And
Yeah,
and maybe AI agents to an extent too. We are storytellers. We like to tell stories. Everybody quotes Maya Angelou when she said, right, nobody remembers what you told them, but everybody remembers how you made them feel. Your words
absolutely.
have the power. And again, just because a tool is making things faster and allowing you extra time or better speed to market doesn't mean you take that authenticity away from it by using your own words in your storytelling. So again, I think if we stay core to our fundamentals, a lot of advancement that's happening around us sometimes just feels noise. And the more we can look at it as an addition and a complement to the way we do our work, our ways of working are going to change for sure. But let's stop debating, what's going to happen. Like we sometimes jump so much to the extreme that we forget how to really live within this middle ground. And again, like I said, I think staying in the middle is what's going to be really, really exciting, and really interesting with that space as well too. And I think journalism is going to be a big part of that. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see how some of this shapes up in the next few years.
And the world moves in unpredictable ways, as you said. And if I just doing some back of a napkin math here, like if I'm a journalist and I've moved and I've focused on that objectivity, that authenticity, all of the things that make for great journalism, and I've picked up 10,000 paid subscribers at $5 a month on Substack, then I'm earning $1 million a year being a journalist. I bet if you could go back to journalism school and tell people that it was possible to earn $1 million a year being a journalist, they'd have laughed at you, right?
Yeah. And
Um,
again, and again, that's just being smart where you are using what's available to you in a really smart way. Now, does that make it just because you're making money out of your profession, as long as you're staying within the realms of doing the right thing and following the protocol? I mean, you mentioned the brand guidelines. There's a reason why brands have guidelines, right? There's a risk associated with running any business. And that's why you have to stay within those guidelines. So I think as much as if we take sometimes a step back and understand why, like the context is so important sometimes. And we all like to be in safe places and rooms where we can say whatever we want to. But the context is that sometimes you have to be within those guidelines because there's a reason why diplomacy works in this world. And that's the basis of and the foundation of foreign relations, right? So I think it's sort of understanding that piece as well. Like you can still be yourself and still stay within the reins. And I think that is the best thing about working in house and doing the job that I do is like it's finding that really beautiful balance because that's where it comes back to the art and the science of storytelling.
quick correction first, because it would have to be $10 a month at 10,000 subscribers. As a data professional, I feel obliged to make a correction
There you go.
before
You
the
got,
comment section
I
comes at me.
know, I know.
Anyway, forgive me. I didn't have my calculator, you see. That was the problem. But you make a really interesting point there. And I'd love to close on this. This was one of the things that brought us together in the first place in terms of our own kind of friendship. So both of us are immigrants, and to that point, have brought our own perspectives into this country. And while we have naturalized and become part of this country, and everything that it represents, we retain elements of our home countries, right, or our countries of birth, and that's I think, an incredibly additive point. My biased perspective, which I'm sure you're not going to disagree with, is that like actually bringing a global perspective or an objective perspective into a different environment can, and this is true of diversity in all forms, and bringing in people with different skills, bringing in people from different backgrounds, if you like, into companies, that it can be that taking objective outside guidance on something can often provide you and provoke you to think in ways that you might not otherwise. And that is a wonderful use case for AI, right? If you've formed an opinion, if you've had a discussion or a debate and are drawing some hypotheses and conclusions, it can be a great thought partner like that as well, much the same as we were as immigrants coming into this country with a different set of values and cultures than those that pre-existed here.
Yeah. And I would say, I think when you and I came, I've been here, I came in 99, and those were the days when you would just have a flip phone. And to call back home in India, you used to take a phone card and a pay card. And then it used to be really, really expensive. Like you're paying like about $2 a minute. And it was a very short conversation. Fast forward to where we are. I mean, my family's at the tip of my phone, and I can call them and do video calls anytime, right? You can send money instantly. Like the world that we live in has changed so much. And I think technology has a lot to do with it. But this is where your lived experiences almost inform the products and the services that we get as well. And I think in terms of storytelling at the intersection of data and analytics, and bringing all those pieces together too, again, the data and the analytics inform sort of certain behaviors and what we need to know, but it's the human perspective. I'll give you a great example. We were once talking about an ad, and back in India, there is no such thing as everybody having 6 rooms, every kid having their own room
Yeah.
for themselves, right? And that's true of a lot of developing countries. And one of the brands was creating this ad, and they showed that one of the kids, it was a Hispanic family, and the kid goes in and shuts the door. In our house, I have 2 daughters. We don't shut our doors. The concept is you don't shut the door. There is no such thing as this is my space, my privacy. We are a family,
Okay.
right? So nobody knew about that, and then they had an advisory group with people with different experiences and lived experiences from different parts of the country, and they said, well, that's not going to work because culturally that's not what we do. And they were able to edit that out of the ad. So I think those are just like a very simple example of why you need people with different perspectives in the room as well. I'll give you another funny example. People look at me and they're like, oh, Sukhi Sahni from India, you must be an engineer. Little do they realize that I have, I do communications for a living. So I'm usually the only person who's not either an engineer or a doctor, but that's called inherent biases, because we just assume everybody from India coming is going to be, having that background. So, I think our experiences make who we are. I'm personally really proud of sort of that perspective, because I really think what differentiates you from others is actually your superpower. That combined with the knowledge and the experiences that you gain and the people that you work with, and leveraging technology and data and analytics, just makes you so much more smarter. But that's also the human element that you talked about. I mean, that's what makes the work that we do so real and so impactful. And I think that is basically the middle ground that we all want to be in.
As someone just as wonderful as you once said, immigrants who get the job done. I well, Sukhi, thank you so much for sharing your lived experiences with me and with the audience today. It's been a fabulous conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as I did. It's been great to reconnect with you. I will book that appointment for 5 years' time, and
Yes,
we will have this conversation again.
It might be 5 months, who knows that? But thank you so much, and this has been
Things change so
terrific.
quickly. And
Yeah.
either way, I look forward to catching up with you real soon.
Sounds great.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Scale Your Business with Data. If today's conversation gave you even one insight, one aha moment, or one new idea to take action on, do me a favor. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who's ready to level up. Until next time, keep asking the right questions, keep challenging the status quo, and keep scaling with data.